Welcome to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, episode 3. Today I'm excited to talk with Danny Taylor-Smith. Danny gave a powerful TEDx talk that got released in January 2021, where he shared his personal story from overcoming life-threatening condition as a baby to navigating life with an autism diagnosis. In that talk, Danny also touched on the importance of support systems, his experiences with bullying and social challenges, and his struggles with workplace discrimination. In today's episode, we'll dive deeper into a few of those topics, including his experiences in education and the workplace, the discrimination he's faced due to his diagnosis, and his intellectual journey through self-education, including his engagement with Jordan Peterson's work. We'll also explore Danny's passion for video games. I hope you will enjoy this conversation. If you do, a follow, like, or subscribe, depending on the platform you're listening on, will be greatly appreciated. And now, here's Danny Taylor-Smith. Your TEDx talk covered a lot of personal ground, including your medical history, your autism diagnosis, and struggles in the workforce. How do you look back on that talk that you gave back then? What would you say differently if you had it today?
Hey, Jeffrey. Before I begin, again, I'd like to say thank you for having me on. But to answer your question, I did that TED Talk a few years ago. It would have been at the end of 2020, right at the end of my master's degree in education. And what I wanted to talk about with that TED Talk specifically was maybe about the decline of education pretty much around the entire world, and a little bit about how the politics of everything feeds into that. That particular topic is quite controversial, and so the organizers of the event saw fit to change it, which I didn't really have much of a choice in. So whenever you do an event much like this, what happens is that you do an audition, whether it be a TED Talk or a TEDx event. And so you go in and you either perform an audition on stage, or you provide a video audition, or maybe you have a meeting with them. And I thought everything was going through as smoothly as possible. I really thought that I was going to be able to convey the message that I really wanted to talk about. But the coach and the organizers, they know a lot of people in academia. And while they were initially okay with the idea of me talking about that topic, they decided to change the topic completely. And the TEDx talk ended up pretty much being about my life. And I think 3 years later, I don't think the content of that TED Talk is really who I really am today. Much of the content is as it pertains to the Neurodivergent Movement and pretty much all of that. So I personally don't really agree with that movement, I guess. I did when I was in my youth. I think that when people are younger, they're a little bit more left-leaning, a little bit more liberal-leaning, and then as they grow older, they become a little bit more conservative as their values and their priorities shift over time, and it becomes less about focusing maybe on themselves and maybe a little bit more on their families and a little bit more on taking responsibility for their lives and looking after other people. So their internal locus of control kind of gets... No, I'm explaining it poorly. Rather than focusing on themselves, they focus on other people and maybe leaving a legacy in what they can contribute to the world. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of things there. You mentioned that the real topics that you wanted to discuss were the decline of education and how politics feeds into that.
Yeah.
Let's discuss that a little bit later. You also mentioned a movement called the Neurodivergent Movement. Do I have that right? And if yes, what is that exactly?
Yeah, no, you've got that right. So what the neurodivergent movement is, or some people might call it the neurodiversity movement, it's essentially a social justice movement to promote equality of what people might call neurological minorities. So people whose brains work in completely different ways. So whether you have autism or, ADHD or any other acronym that you can possibly think of, and you feel like you're oppressed in that manner by whether it be parents or your caregivers or your teachers or society at large. Many people with those kinds of neurological differences kind of feel like they need to stand up and make a real difference. So I know I certainly did at the time, but as I grew up, I discovered Jordan Peterson and ended up on this phenomenal platform that we call Peterson Academy Talking to You. And then I moved away from that crowd of people and I went to university. I got married earlier this year in April. We had our firstborn 3 months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. He's an absolutely amazing boy. I never thought I would have children in a million years. I didn't even think at any point I would even get married, but here we are. And
Good on you.
yay, I would say my life it keeps improving every year. Back when I was a teenager, I didn't even think I'd be able to really, what's the word that I'm thinking of? I originally didn't think I was going to be able to cope in a workplace environment, because that was the way that autism spectrum disorder was kind of conveyed back in the 1990s when I was diagnosed at about 8 years old. I now no longer agree with that diagnosis. I think many who get diagnosed with autism or ADHD, I think it now in 2024, that the whole concept of psychological differences, much like that, I think it's massively blown out of proportion to the degree it is now really, really silly. Really.
Yeah, so to summarize that neurodivergency movement, what you're saying is it's a movement that makes sure that, I believe you call them neuroatypical people, so people, for example, with autism spectrum, get equal opportunity and equal treatment, I suppose, within the workplace environment. And that movement sought to enforce that within organizations. Is that the correct way to summarize it?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't really look at autism and ADHD today as really neurological conditions as such. I see them more like their philosophies or a different set of values, a different mindset, a different approach to life, and really no different from any other philosophy. I think people with those conditions are informed by a different set of values, which is brought about, by their upbringing or their economic situation or wherever they happen to be in the world. That's what I think. I could be completely wrong, but that's how I look at it now.
What changed for you? So you mentioned that you came into contact with Jordan Peterson's work. In the beginning, you were in support as a kid of the neurodivergency movement, and later on you weren't. What was the turning point for you?
All right. So when I was about 22, 23, I just moved out of the home, and the two narratives that I'd been told pretty much my entire life were that people very much like me were dumb, they couldn't make it in conventional society, but at the same time, they were also superheroes. So you've got that conflicting narrative there. So, we're like these empowered victims. We're not just the oppressors, but we're, like the people being oppressed at the same time. Like, it didn't really make sense. It's a really odd contradiction. So that's what I thought initially. And my family were going to go on a trip to Canada for about 6 months. And I wanted to stay behind with the girlfriend that I had at the time. I was very, very, very young, and that relationship didn't really work out. I had a very inappropriate view on what women were at the time. I think actually much like Peterson himself, he, like me, I believe he put women up on a pedestal and viewed them as these almost godly beings of which you had to bow towards them. That they're absolutely these angelic creatures, and I really didn't have any self-respect, and I had to do everything to make them happy because I really, really desperately, my whole entire identity was pretty much getting a girlfriend. And I realized, okay, you know what, maybe I've got a few issues in relation to this and I need to try and get it fixed. So I began looking up books in relation to, pickup books from pickup artists, and I thought, okay, maybe if I trick these women into getting with me, which sounds in hindsight absolutely terrible. I thought, okay, maybe if I can get them or trick them into liking me, then maybe these women will actually like me. It's actually a fairly common issue in Australia, actually. And the first book that I picked up, it wasn't a Jordan Peterson book, but it was a book that would eventually start a long chain of events that would lead me to Peterson. It was a book that basically taught me, look, the reason why women don't like you, Danny, is because you are a pathetic slob. Like, you don't have a job, you don't have any money, you don't have any aspirations, you need to get up off your backside and make something of yourself and create an environment in which people want to naturally gravitate towards you, so that, you want to be a human being that has the best interests at heart for pretty much everyone and for pretty much everyone else. And I thought, okay, so the issue isn't so much that these people are, up on a pedestal. It means, maybe I need to change my entire worldview, and I need to kind of reframe my schema, as you will. And so I pretty much changed my entire outlook on life. So I made a note of going back to university after I finished my degree in film and television to study psychology. And I remember feeling really, really unengaged with the content that they were teaching. And so one day I went to the library completely bored, I skipped class, and I sat down at a computer and I popped on my headphones and I pulled up YouTube, and there was the first Maps of Meaning lecture by Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this was shortly after the dramas with Bill C-16 became quite widespread from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to pretty much the entire Maps of Meaning lectures and how he described everything. And then I watched all of the personality lectures, and I was completely gripped. I was completely engaged, because here was a man that wasn't just talking about different means by which to view the world, especially symbolically, but he also offered a lot of practical and pragmatic advice as it related to life. And in a way, I kind of was drawn to this. It was like, this guy is like the dad I've never had. Like, this is like completely mental. I love everything he's telling me. And I decided, after having watched pretty much 2 days worth of these lectures, that I was going to quit my degree in psychology, which I'd only maybe been in for about 5 or 6 weeks. And I would enroll in something else that was maybe a little bit more aligned with who I wanted to be as, a grown-up, as an adult human being. And that drew me to my master's degree in education. So that's how I just
sounds like quite a roller coaster back then, and also quite a change for you as a person.
Yeah, no, I'm a completely different person that I was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I didn't really take a lot of responsibility for my life. I used that diagnosis, which I'd had since I was about 8 years old, as a means of avoiding responsibility. But the moment I began, trying to tell the truth as much as I frequently can, I obviously still stumble in everyday life. I don't think anybody is perfect, especially not me. But the more I began aligning who I was with as much of the truth as possible, and developing a bit of a growth mindset, and really trying to take accountability for my life and for other people, and to, just be a really good person to the best of my ability, things began to change dramatically. And over time, I've become a much happier person, and here we are.
It's quite interesting that you took that route, in the sense of, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong in any way, but it sounds to me like you were pretty much looking for your identity.
Oh, 100%. No, I would agree. I think it's a part of, being in your early 20s, really. When you become, I don't know, when you're growing up, when you're a kid, you don't even know what identity really is. You're pretty much given the identity that your parents give you, or that society gives you.
Yeah, that you hear being repeated over and over again, which is definitely the situation when you are dealing with a situation of autism.
Exactly. Especially when everyone is telling you, okay, here are the characteristics of a condition like yours. You fit into this category. You fit into this box. And so you are not allowed to step outside this box, because otherwise your actions are affecting other people. And we will yell at you, and we will get you into trouble if you step outside of it. So I thought, okay, so there's that. And then you become a teenager, and maybe you reflect on being put in that box a little bit more, and you kind of become proud of being in that box. And being in that box becomes like your entire identity. And then, you enter into the adult world, and you realize, well, no one really cares about those boxes really at all, provided you've got something of value to show for it.
No, that's definitely true. I think that box makes the most sense in your own mind, and the outside world doesn't really care that much about it. They care more about who you are as a person, what you can provide for them as a person, how you behave as a person. And I think both sides are very interesting to consider, because at some point you can have a situation where a person is clearly different than, well, let's say the neurotypical person, which is in this case the non-autistic person, and tries to find the reason why that is, how they are different, what is it exactly that makes them different? It's very
Yeah.
hard to understand if you don't have the data in order to analyze, what's going on. So somebody coming to you and then providing you the label like, hey, okay, we figured it out. You have autism, you have ADHD, you have Asperger's syndrome, you have something like that. It
Yeah.
can be a huge clarity for people to figure that out, because now all of a sudden they understand the dynamics of their personality, they understand the dynamics of how they behave and why things happened in the past. But on the other hand, what you're saying is also definitely true. If you fully 100% commit to that identity and you don't break out of it anymore, you become that label.
100%. It becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, and I'm seeing that more and more
Yeah,
reflected
for sure.
today. I'm seeing that more and more reflected today. Where it's a very complex and complicated issue.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think it's different now than it was 20 years ago?
100%. Well, the internet for one. 20, 30 years ago, if you were diagnosed with whatever condition, whatever it could be, there was very little in the way of support that you would get. Nowadays, that with virtually unlimited information, you can pretty much find the tools by which you can navigate the world, mentally speaking, maybe emotionally, I don't know. Maybe you can find all that online. And that's pretty much what Peterson Academy actually really is. It's providing you some of those extra tools that maybe Gen X and the baby boomers and maybe some of the older generations wouldn't necessarily think of providing with their children. Things that I most certainly did not learn when I was a kid. Having those, that mental toolbox, I think has been absolutely incredible.
You mentioned the decline of education in the beginning, that was one of the topics you wanted to discuss at the TEDx Talk. What did you mean by that?
So a little bit of what I wanted to talk about today. We've already actually discussed a little bit of it. So I've noticed over the last 30 years, as I've been in and out of various elements of the education system, how there has been a distinctive decline in the way that the world has approached education. What I mean by that is, before the internet came along, in order to become a proficient expert in any particular field, it was really quite difficult to find that information that you needed to excel in that field. So what you generally had to would be, you would have to do really, really well in school. And then maybe you went to university and then you studied and you read lots of books, and the information you found in those books wasn't particularly widely accessible. And then you used that information and maybe you became a doctor. Or maybe you became a nurse, or maybe you became a teacher, or maybe you became a lawyer. And then what gradually happened over time, especially with the creation of the internet, now we've got the opposite issue, in which there's maybe too much information, like way, way, way too much information. So we've now moved into the post-modern era, where the primary motive being isn't really to seek out information, but to kind of deconstruct it and find out what isn't completely useless. What is it? Yeah, it's finding what we need to use in our mental toolboxes to navigate all the trash that is completely everywhere. Because most of what I see online nowadays is, it's complete rubbish. So it's becoming increasingly more difficult. Granted, I think people are a lot smarter than they were 100 years ago. It's just the ways through which we navigate information has completely changed. And I think a lot of the older generation are still kind of, when I'm talking about the older generation, I'm using my parents here as a bit of an example. They don't really know how to use the online world very much, or very well. It's a completely different environment.
Yeah, it kind of starts with the millennial generation. That's the generation that grew up with the internet.
Exactly. They didn't just, I think, grow up with the internet. They were a part of their lives. When did the millennial generation start? They began at the early beginning of the 90s. They still remember a time, however brief, of what life was like before the internet. So they've grown up with the internet. So they've got a completely different perspective on how technology works as the older generations do. I remember, like, growing up, how my parents used to say to me, like, don't believe anything that you hear on TV, because it could be, it could mean absolutely anything. And now we're having to come back and tell our parents, don't believe everything that we see on the internet. It's a complete reversal, because now there's too much information, and they don't know how to shift through that absolute mess that is the online world. It's simply too much. So, and because there's too much information, they're still using strategies and techniques, I think, that don't necessarily fit in with a technology-rich world. That's not to say that they don't have good points in certain areas. I really don't want my son to, have an iPad with him 24/7. I want him to kind of develop some of those real world skills outside of the internet. I want him to, know how to change a tire. I want him to know how to put fuel in his car. I want him to know how to mow the lawn. I want him to know how to, have those basic skills that help you navigate life outside of a computer and the symbolic world. I think a portion of that is perfectly healthy. That's perfectly fine, but you really do need those skills. But I do think the older generation kind of underestimate just how much the world is now online and how much it's essential for actually navigating that space. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think the case you're trying to make is that the older generation that didn't grow up with the internet had to actively seek information out in, for example, libraries at universities in order to learn about a specific subject and to become good at it, while maintaining their practical skills. Like you said, like switching tires. Which will say, well, you could make the argument it's a simpler way of life with less information. While now, well, to use your words, we have like an information overload situation where there's so much to do online, there's so much to scroll through, where you're not actively seeking information, well, in the same sense as you did like 40 years ago, but you are instead filtering down the information that you have, you're consolidating it and trying to find where the truth lies. Is that a correct summary?
I would say that would be completely correct. I think some of the language that I can't remember which Peterson Academy lecturer it was. They used the word consecration. It's where what a lot of religions do, right, is that gradually over time, it could have been Jonathan Padger, I'm not entirely sure. He said what a lot of religions do is that initially they're very resistant to change. They're very conservative, but gradually over time, as the change becomes, they realize that some of those changes might actually be beneficial to those values or maybe even add to them, then they'll take in those values and eventually it will improve that initial thought process or dogma or whatever you want to call it. Consecration is what it's. I think that's what we're trying to do.
I'm still trying to link up those two specific topics that you mentioned. So the decline of education in general, that's one thing. That's the one that you also wanted to discuss in your TEDx talk. But at the other hand, we have the seeking information versus the filtering down information in order to get to the truth, which is its own challenge by itself right now. Because how the hell do you know what is true right now that you read on the internet?
Exactly.
How are those two related to you? So the decline of education as a topic in general, in relation to the information overload situation and the seeking of the truth that we are facing right now. How are those two connected, and where do you think well, maybe it's a broad question, but where do you think the solution lies, or at least where do you think we should take the next step to?
Okay, I think the next step that we need to take is really kind of come to grips with how everybody has different perspectives about literally everything. I don't think even in 2024, people still have that understanding that, I have a completely different view on life as you do. And part of what the field of psychology is studying those social and biological social and biological variables that make people different and special. And so what I'd like to do, and I might need your help with going through this. So I'm going to do what Jordan Peterson does. We're going to do a bit of a exploration of this topic. So please bear with me. So let's say 200 years ago, at let's say the dawn of the field of psychology, we had men burning, women, witches. We had differences in understanding between men and women, and men didn't know how to control women. So it was easier or more convenient to just burn them at the stake because they didn't know how to understand them, pretty much. And I think this is covered in Stephen Hicks' lecture series in postmodern philosophy. So at some point, men came to this kind of logical leap where they thought, okay, well, there's the there's the known sets of behavior that we are aware of, that we're familiar with, and then you've got the unknown sets of behavior that we're familiar with, the unfamiliar, the normal and the abnormal. So they've created two categorizations right there. So you've got normal, abnormal, known, unknown, familiar, unfamiliar. And when people tend to step outside that box of what is familiar and they start acting in a way that is not cohesive with man's view of the world, then they end up, being burned at the stake pretty much. So men decided to kind of come together to create this field of psychology to kind of really get to the root of this, to really determine, okay, what is it that makes these people that are abnormal, or what makes their psychology different than ours? So
what are the reasons for it?
Exactly. So they began analyzing different types of behavior and then putting them into these little subjective categories. So keep in mind they're entirely subjective. They're not objective universal truths. They're not like mathematics. So you begin analyzing these different kinds of behavior, and we begin giving them these different kinds of labels. So by the 20th century, we would have maybe called some of these personality disorders, or we would have called them autism or ADHD. So we're putting them into these different boxes, right? And keep in mind, these are entirely subjective. To this day, to my understanding, and I have looked into the literature quite extensively, we don't know what causes autism or ADHD. We're not entirely sure if it's a biological issue. We don't know if it's a result of the social environment. We're not even entirely sure if it's a combination of the two. It probably is, but at the end of the day, what these conditions are essentially, they're not universal truths. They don't technically really exist in the way that we think about them. They are the construction of these boxes, the categorizations, they're man-made labels that they used 100 years ago to help human beings in that field kind of figure out how to navigate other people in the world. So you go, okay, well, that person has this condition, because they have these characteristics, and they act like this, and we've measured how empathetic they are, and we've measured how narcissistic they are, and we've measured all these different things to some degree. The problem is that the means by which we measure these are entirely dependent on an individual's perspective. You could be completely trained in the field of psychology or education. You're still giving a professional opinion. It's not a universal truth. You can be a subject matter expert, but at the end of the day, you're just a human being with an idea of what you think is the truth, or as close to the truth as it possibly could be.
Right. So they're like abstractions of behavior, of thinking.
Yes.
That if you fully 100% identify it, you leave out the nuance and the things that make you special and unique and skilled.
Yes. And in a way, we kind of look at philosophies and values in a very, very similar fashion as we do these subjective mental constructs of abnormal psychology. They're a little bit different, obviously, but they're still abstract creations or representations. That they're still an idea. They're not a real thing. They're groupings of things, if that makes sense. Much like how you would, let me think, I need to think of a good, much how we might look at a cup and a baby's bottle, and we would group them into the same category as being containers for liquids. It's just subjective, it's all about universals and particulars, but in terms of rather, I don't know, conventional objects, we're talking about patterns of human behavior and ideas and philosophies and values. Is any of this making sense, or am I rambling? Please let me know.
No, it makes perfect sense. I think the summary is that 200 years ago, when the start of psychology happened, there were abstractions that were being created in order to categorize people, and those abstractions, in some degree, maintained their structure throughout, well, the last 200 years, then I suppose.
Yeah.
Is that a correct summary?
Yeah, 100%. And what I think has happened is, in some way, gradually over time, to a minority of people, those abstractions aren't just in the mind. For a lot of people, they've become real life. When you have
the label.
Exactly. They think the label is real life. Almost like you're taking it straight from a storybook. And I think this has partly contributed to the decline of education. It's this, I don't think it's so much maybe an educational issue, maybe it's more of a philosophical issue. So I think as people are growing up, somewhere along the way, the mental constructs through which they navigate the world somewhere philosophically get all mixed up and confused. And they start thinking that this label that they've given them is essentially the whole entire identity. I maybe did not explain that very well. I probably need to think about it a little bit more, but that's pretty much how I view life at the moment and how I view the educational system and how I view part of psychology and philosophy in general. I think people have become very, very attached to those labels as well. They need those labels to ground them in what little reality they have left to help them keep sane, I guess. Does that make sense? Sure.
So it makes 100% sense what you're saying, that the moment you identify fully with the label, that can cause issues, and you're basically you're basically penalizing yourself. You're not allowing yourself to do specific things, to go out there, to be skillful, to be to show who you are, because that label is holding you back. Yet I think a lot of people do believe that label is real and it is who they are. And apparently you've also experienced the same thing, because you mentioned also in your TEDx talk that label caused you issues within the workplace. Could you tell me more about how that went?
So I don't really associate myself with that label anymore. I did in my early 20s. So when I was a teenager, my parents would tell me, Danny, you need to go out and get a job. Any job. We don't care what that job is. Just go out and get a job. But because I thought I was an idiot based on that label, I didn't think I was capable of getting a job. And when I entered into the workplace, because of that perspective on life, I found it very, very difficult to connect with other people. I would look at all these other people, much like that meme of that, that black and white meme of the guy that's standing at the back of the room while watching everybody else party. Like I would be sitting there going, these people are much more competent than me. They've got much more that they contribute to society. They're charismatic, and there's me in all of my dumb glory, who can barely make a sentence. I can't connect with these people. And then gradually over time, through just basic life experience and having a diversity of different challenges, or by doing different things, I was able to learn more and more and more and build up my schema to develop a maybe more truthful understanding of the world. I think the way through which you conquer labels is by understanding the point of the labels and recognizing why they actually are in some way kind of important. I'm not saying that we get rid of them completely, because if you do not have a stepping stone to that next level of your development, you kind of need that to help you get to the next level so you can navigate the world. You can't get to level 3 unless you complete levels 1 and 2, developmentally speaking, if that makes sense.
You connect to people today.
How do I connect to people today? Usually not with conversations like this. I try to look at everything with a bit of a sense of humor, and I try to look at the absurdity of life with an air of positivity. I like to crack jokes. I like to be self-deprecatory. I can't say that word properly. My apologies. I try to provide as much value as I possibly can to other people, and do what I said earlier, try and create an environment through which people feel like they are safe, so that they can approach me and that we can interact and we can have conversations like this. The more I give while simultaneously establishing boundaries, I think is the key to having much better, longer lasting relationships. So for example, when I met you, what I thought I would do is okay, here's a gentleman who has created a platform. He has created this safe space on this platform where he can talk about himself and kind of provide value to other people by talking to other people. And I thought, okay, he has created that environment. I feel safe to approach this man so that we can have an exchange of ideas. And then I gave to you by way of that email when I gave you that PDF, which I thought you might find interesting. And from there, it becomes a reciprocal relationship until I imagine in the future you decide you don't like me anymore, and then the relationship deteriorates. So
right.
That's how I think it goes. So I think the way to go about life is to try and do what is in the best interests of other people, but not just from my perspective. It's also asking them, what do you need to get to that next level of development? And how can I help you? Is it knowledge? Is it money? Is it, I don't know, just having a conversation? Is it making you something to eat? I don't know, whatever that could be.
Right.
Something that can make their day, just simply being a good human being, a nice human being.
I'm just trying to get an idea of how that looks in practice, because to me as a person, we're speaking right now one-to-one, and
Yeah.
you're incredibly friendly, you are open, you're well articulated, so it's quite nice to just speak one-on-one, and that works perfectly. What I'm really trying to look for, so specifically in the workplace, specifically in situations where there's larger groups, for example,
Yeah.
there's a lot more chaos. It's less structured than a one-on-one conversation is.
Yeah.
How does that specifically look for you? Maybe we should offset it. So how did it look for you 10 years ago, and how does it look for you today?
10 years ago, it was just pure chaos. I did not know how to navigate that environment at all whatsoever. I was at people's beck and call. I just did whatever it was that they wanted me to. And I didn't really know how to cope. I didn't know how to deal emotionally. So what I decided to do was look at the purpose behind why we have groups, and what are the wanting to know the social dynamics of how we operate within those groups. And if there is a hierarchy within those groups, what do each people on each level of that hierarchy value, and how can I be nice with them so that, we can all fit together in a really cohesive, unified way, while still retaining some sense of individuality. And just, I'm rambling, my apologies. I try to look at everything from both a bottom-up perspective and a top-down perspective. So I try to today get the people within the organization and the group as a whole as two completely, separate entities. Like, for example, when you go to work for a business, you can always tell what a healthy business looks like by way of their core values and their mission statement, so their brand identity. And if companies generally don't have those two things, a set of values by which to live by, and a mission or a purpose by which is their direction to go, you probably shouldn't be working for that organization, because they don't know why they exist outside of maybe earning a profit. And I find that today, when my values and my mission align with those organizations, the chances that I will connect with the people within that unified collective, that they're much bigger. Now, everything that I've just explained, I had no idea what any of that was maybe 10 years ago. It's a very marketing way of looking at life. I've been working in marketing for maybe about 15 years now. That's how I try to approach everything. And not just that, so to speak, I also try to look at how does this group of people, this organization, this collective, how do they interact with other collectives? What are their values? Are our values with their collective, are they going to be compatible? Do they align? Can we have a transaction, an exchange of ideas? How can we all get it to work? And you'd be surprised how many people that I've met over the last 15 years that have been CEOs and managing directors or general managers, and they don't understand anything of what I've actually just told you. It's really, really spooky, because they've never actually thought about it before. They've never really broken those ideas down. So that's how I kind of look at everything differently today. I think with the knowledge and experience, it's much easier today than navigating what that world was a very long time ago.
Do you think it could have something to do with people in management positions or higher never having worked on like the operational side of the company, and therefore didn't have to engage in the communication that is needed with the product group in order to do the actual operational work that the company provides?
I think it depends on the company and the individuals. So, for example, you get like a lot of managers, line managers that become subject to, I don't know if you've heard of the Peter Principle. What the Peter Principle is that people work up to their level of incompetence. So, for example, what I mean is you could work for a company, like let's say you, Jeffrey, you were working for an engineering company and you really liked welding things. Like that was your entire world. You absolutely loved welding things. You liked fitting things together and building things. That was your entire, like that was your skill set. And because you were so good at it, you got promoted to the next level of management. Problem, though, is that your skill set lies mainly in building things and maybe not in leading other people. So you've got a completely different skill set. And because you're missing those mental tools by which to lead other people, you have reached your level of incompetence. Until you have developed the skills to progress to the next level, you will stay where you are, essentially.
Yeah, so you would need like a leadership training or at least some communication training in order to start making the move towards a managerial position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it funny actually how many people don't realize that people have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. So I used to work for a diamond drilling company. They're actually the company that is I'm going to begin working for again in 6 weeks. So to people that don't know, I got laid off a week ago by my current company for a really, really silly reason. But because I know people and I've tried my best to establish relationships with everyone that I can, they were more than happy to invite me back. So I'm using this as the paternity leave that I never got. So I'm having a nice little holiday, which is great. Back when I was working with this diamond drilling company, all of the blue collar workers, all of the diamond drillers and the offsiders and the maintenance people, their skills were mainly working with the machinery. And their skills were in working underground and drilling core out of really, really thick rock and, finding nickel and gold and virtually every mineral that you can think of. Now, that isn't really my area because I have a heart condition and I will die if I go underground. Not literally, but it's not an area I would really very well in. But when it comes to, let's say, anything to do with marketing or a computer or, the philosophical angle of working within a business, that is my skill set. So I remember taking a camera and part of my job description back when I used to work for them was to be sent all around the country to different mine sites where they would send me underground to actually film these guys at work for promotional material. And it can be a very laborious job if it isn't really your thing. I used to think that the only thing more boring than actually doing the job was filming these guys do it through the lens of a camera. And then after I'd captured all those shots that I needed, let's say about 300 shots over a period of like 2 hours, then I would need to pretty much do absolutely nothing for another 9 hours until they would actually let me back up to the surface. So there wasn't really much for me to do. They always thought whenever I went to site that I was completely incompetent because I didn't understand the way they thought. I didn't understand any of their processes. I didn't understand their values or the way that they looked at life or how much they really actually enjoyed their jobs, even if I considered it to be really boring. So they thought I was a complete idiot, right? At least until I went back to the office and then they had to come back with me and they had to write an email, but they didn't know how to spell properly because they were completely illiterate. So here were these men earning, I don't know, $150,000 a year in Australian money, with a completely different set of skills that didn't know how to, do basic grammar. And so I would have to do their emails for them. I would have to write up marketing documents for them and for giant tender submissions for all these companies. I had to help them with their accounting. All these really abstract skills they had no idea how to use. It's a completely different skill set. There's nothing wrong with that. So that explanation that I just made out about people having completely different skill sets, I guess you could say if we were to use neurodivergent language, if we were to go back a bit, 10 years ago, I would have said, okay, I'm really, really, really dumb because I don't know how to operate a giant drill. But then someone would come back to me and they'd tell me, well, actually, Danny, your superpower is using the computer. And to me, that would be really contradictory and I wouldn't really know how to make sense of that. And now, in the year 2024, I've realized in my head, I have overly complexified how that all works. And it's really, in reality, really quite simple. Everybody has strengths, everybody has weaknesses. We don't need to pathologize that into something that is really quite normal and something that has been absolutely blown out of proportion over the last 30 years.
Going back to the labels. If you have in the back of your mind that you have a specific label, whether it's ADHD or Asperger's syndrome or whatever, and you live by that label, it becomes very daunting to do something very basic. So if if you go to the position where you, for example, can become a manager or something like that, and you figure out, okay, you need a whole different skill set, and part of the skill set is being good at communication, which are definitely skills that you can work on, whoever you are and whatever diagnosis you have. It becomes very hard in order to take that step.
Yeah.
Because there's so much out there. There's pretty much a whole Wikipedia page out there with like 30 pages of text that is working against you, that prevents you from doing that. That's the stuff that you have in the back of your mind. So realizing that you are not, and this is repeating the thing that we discussed earlier, but realizing that you are not that label and that these are very um, um, specific skills that you can work on, you can actually take the step to work on those and
Yeah.
go to a position and be successful in it. 100%.
100%. 100%. Everything that you've just outlined, I'm not sure if that's actually common sense. I wish that it was, but the fact that there are so many people around the world that actually struggle with what you've just outlined is part of the reason why I think there's been a decline in education. So
I think people like labels. I think people like to understand where they stand and how they get to. People love groups. People love labels. People love to be part of something that is broad, that is bigger than just themselves. The moment that you are in a position where you don't really understand what's going on, the moment that someone comes to you and says like, "Hey, Danny, I have the solution for you. This is what you are dealing with." That is a very attractive proposition, because now all of a sudden you have a formula that you can apply to your whole life in order to structure what is happening around you, and you can build on top of that. So it is very attractive in order to get that label. The pathology in that is that you take it too far and you live by that label and not doing anything else anymore, because then you don't allow yourself to grow and to learn and to do the things that you should be doing in order to provide for your community and for the people around you that you love. Which is, I suppose, I'm thinking what the answer to that thing should be, but it feels to me right now that you have to find as an individual where the balance should be, and you have to balance those two things out, both understanding who you are as a person and still having the door open to take the steps to go on adventure and to do the things that you should be doing.
100%. There's a level of fluidity there. I know a lot of people have been using that word fluid. There's a level of fluidity there, a balance that you need to try and maintain, which can often be seen as nearly impossible. But
Right.
I think it's with hard work, it is somewhat doable. But I think it was Thomas Sowell. I think he said there are no solutions to life; there are only trade-offs. Sometimes you have to give up certain things in order to get other things, and it's a process that never really concludes until the end of your life. It's something that you have to keep constantly working at. Like, people talk a lot about work-life balance, for example. It's a process. I think what a lot of people do as well, when they see these foundations that are being presented to them, like the kinds that you described, is that they only maybe look at those foundations from one direction. Like, for example, like I think the Peterson family are absolutely great, which they are, because the value through which they have contributed to the world is absolutely phenomenal and outstanding, and we should all be thankful for that. But there is, at the end of the day, they're only human beings that are trying to do their best. They've got kids, they're a family, they're just people, granted very, very clever people, and there are things that they do that I don't necessarily agree with. Can't think of what they are at the top of my head. Probably their approach, I think Jordan Peterson's approach on maybe abortion, I think that I would have a completely different stance on. But at the end of the day, I'm just a human as well. But we agree on the majority of things. I think we've actually got an issue in Australia at the moment. Our national security level got raised not too long ago because they're worried about the boys all around Australia being radicalized by people like Andrew Tate online. And because they're quite rhetoric that he's spouting online. And granted, some of it is very attractive and some of it is even quite truthful. There are a few points that Andrew Tate makes that even I would agree with. But I think, even a broken clock is right twice a day. A lot of what he talks about, I don't necessarily agree with. My values don't align with those. I probably wouldn't be his best friend. It's difficult assessing groups and people from, that positive angle and that negative angle and weighing up the pros and cons. And I think people are really, really comfortable, or maybe the word complacent would maybe be the correct word. People are finding it really, really difficult in finding that healthy balance in assessing other people in that regard.
Yeah, and I also think you need somebody to look up to. You need like a mentor, somebody that symbolizes what you could be and what you want to be. And Andrew Tate, and I don't know enough about the guy. I don't follow him in any shape or form.
I'm the exact same.
Yeah, but I do know that he's an influence for a lot of people. And whether that's good or bad, that's I'll leave it up to anybody to decide for themselves. But apparently, he provides a message that is very attractive to people that either need it or don't have that specific part that's attractive to them in their lives currently.
Of course.
Whether that is building a relationship, whether that is finding their footing in the world, whether that is taking responsibility to do something. I don't know exactly what it is. Once again, I don't know nothing. I don't know enough about it, but there's something there for sure.
Yep, I would agree.
All right. A little bit of philosophy. I have one question for you about that.
Sure.
So you've posted a couple of comments on the Peterson Academy, and it seems that Nietzsche is a recurring theme in your studies.
Sure.
What specifically draws you to his work?
I think a lot of Nietzsche, a lot of his thoughts and a lot of his philosophies, I mean, he was around, nearly 150, 200 years ago. I think a lot of those philosophies have kind of influenced the way how modern life operates, so to speak. So after a while, you start to notice little patterns in different things and in different people's kinds of psychology. And he is really quite an interesting man in that regard. How he approaches the concept of nihilism, and maybe he provides an example of maybe not what to do, I find really quite fascinating. I think he's a very influential person. I'm still learning about him each and every day. Kind of much like how Peterson, during his Peterson Academy lectures, is kind of exploring beyond good and evil. I'm still doing that today. I'm hoping that in a year from now, I'll have a much more concrete understanding of who he is. No part in doubt due to what Peterson has explained so far. I'm really, really looking forward to, I don't know, maybe one day he'll do a part 2, or maybe he'll add a few more lectures to that lecture series so that we can actually complete good and evil. But I think he's a really interesting guy. I really like history. I really like how tiny little things can affect pretty much the course of history and how we understand it.
All right. Let's talk about the most important topic of the conversation. Video games.
Yes.
What is your top 5?
My top 5. Okay. So that would be really, really challenging. Okay. At the top, I'd probably place Super Mario Galaxy.
Okay.
For no other reason than, it's a Mario game and we all love Mario games. But philosophically speaking, I really like games that provide a philosophical take on the world. I think Dr. Warren Farrell from The Boy Crisis would be absolutely appalled to know that I've been gaming for pretty much my entire life, as I'm pretty sure most people like me have. And I can certainly understand how people might find getting too involved in video games to the point that it can be harmful, it can be bad. But I think by playing games that are actually maybe good for you or provide an interesting moral or an interesting lesson, I think those are the games that we should be focused on. Like you've got good movies and you've got bad movies. I think we need to find the good games and then maybe focus our attention on them. So a really good game I played at the beginning of this year, and I posted actually about it on my feed because I thought some people might like it. It's called Chants of Sanaa. And it's a game about languages. So it's a take on the Tower of Babel biblical narrative, which is probably one of my favorite biblical narratives. And I don't really go out of my way to read the Bible a whole lot. I'm still learning. So I have read The Language of Creation by Matthew Pageau. So it's definitely something worth exploring. But the reason why I like that game, right? So you've got the Tower of Babel, and you're at the bottom. of this tower as this little hooded dude, and there are 5 different groups of people on different levels of the tower, and the goal of this game is to reach the top of the tower by learning these really, really in-depth languages through the act of deductive reasoning. And once you've deciphered all of these words, and there's like maybe, I can't remember, maybe 40 or 50 words per group, you can then construct a grammar for these words to understand what they understand to be their purpose or their reason for existing, their meaning. And then you take that language that you've learned and then you use that language to decipher the next level, who have a completely different set of values and a completely different language and a completely different grammar. And then you work your way up the tower, learning what it essentially means to be human. And I absolutely love that.
And what's it called? Chance of Sonar?
Chance of Sonar. I actually spoke to the developers very, very briefly about a year ago. I love the game that much. I just wanted to give them my thanks for creating a game. To my complete surprise, they replied back and they thanked me for giving them something of a positive review on their game. So no, yeah, absolutely great.
And what is it on? Is it on PC or what is it on?
It's pretty much on everything that you can think of. PC, Nintendo Switch, probably PlayStation and Xbox. I'd need to look into it. The other games I'd suggest are maybe the Talos Principle. That is a really, really big one. Have you played that one before?
I have. I haven't finished it though.
It's good.
I found it a bit too... so I'm not really a big puzzle guy. I enjoy puzzles, and I will give you an example later on. I enjoy puzzles as part of the broader game pretty much. But if it's really a puzzle-centered game, I tend to not get too engaged that much.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. Nah, all good.
I saw that the second version came, at least the sequel came out, or is already out, or will come out soon, I believe. It was announced recently.
It is my understanding it is out and just as good, if not better, than the first one.
Beautiful.
But I've not played the second one. I've only played the first one. I had my mind blown philosophically when it came out 10 years ago. It was great, and I would highly recommend it to anyone.
Is it not by the same guy who made Braid?
No, so that's a completely different guy. You're thinking of Jonathan Blow.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. He was in that movie, the indie game.
I haven't seen that movie, but I know a lot about it. I know many of the people that were in that movie. Know of them. I haven't met them. So people including Jonathan Blow and the creators of Super Meat Boy and Fez.
Edmund Macmillan.
There you go. That's the guy. I have Fez. I haven't played it. But no, I am a very big fan of Jonathan Blow. I think his games Braid and The Witness are really, really compelling.
The Witness.
Yes. So Braid I like because what Braid teaches people about is that it's important to have a goal, but you need to make sure that what goal you're aiming towards is the right one. Because otherwise, if you aim your energy at something that could be potentially disastrous, it could blow up in your face.
I think you can go back in time in that game, right?
Yes, you can. And that's part of the symbolism in the game. It's like after you've made the mistake, you kind of can rewind or ruminate how you think about these events in your mind so that should those exact same events come along, you can kind of use what you've learned previously to create a better kind of alternative route to success. It's a very cyclical way of thinking, the Ouroboros, so to speak. So what he does in Braid is that he uses the concept of rescuing a princess in a video game, much like Mario would save Princess Toadstool, Princess Peach. She's symbolic of a goal, something that we want to try and strive to attain, whatever that could be. And then he juxtaposes that idea of a goal and the princess with that of the atomic bomb and Oppenheimer. Which I think is very cool, but those are just 2 examples. So there's different meta layers to it. So you've got the very cheesy video game layer, and then you've got the Oppenheimer layer to it, and then you've got like the meta layer through which you then talk about goals as an idea, which I think is really, really cool.
And everything is binding together with those puzzles that you solve in the meantime.
Exactly. And then you've got The Witness, which was his sequel. I'm really curious actually what his third game will be, whenever that will release in a billion years. But The Witness is pretty much a game that follows that kind of same similar level of thinking about the cyclical nature of knowledge, where you try to learn new things and then you make mistakes and then you learn from them through a continuous process of education. And perspective, which I think is really cool. I don't have as much to say about The Witness, although I do think it's really, really cool. But the last game that I'd like to mention is a game called Journey, which came out a billion years ago.
That's the one in the desert, right?
Yes, you are completely correct. Yes, so the whole game is told with no words, and you are a single traveler whose entire goal is to traverse this big, vast desert and go up a mountain. And it's got a wonderful orchestral soundtrack playing in the background, and there are a lot of archetypal themes playing throughout the entire experience. So you've got this really strong, powerful narrative that is being spoken through with film and video game conventions without using conventional language, telling this almost invisible story. It's very intuitive. It's something that you understand almost like on an unconscious level. It's very much the hero's journey, and that's why I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I remember Journey. I never played Journey myself, but I played their previous game. I think the developers called That Game Company.
Yes.
And their previous game that came before Journey was a game called Flower, and I played it back on the PlayStation 3. And pretty much you were like, in that game you played like a brush of wind. Yeah, you played the wind, and you took petals of flower and you collected them while you were drifting through a level, and with that flower you wanted to bring color back to the world. It was a very beautiful game. Yeah.
It reminds me of Disney's Fantasia from the year 1940, where it's very much like a video game that is like a symphony, if you will.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah, so you're not just controlling the wind and the flowers and the petals. You're controlling the environment. You're controlling, I don't know, life itself, if you will, but the earth itself. It's an absolutely beautiful game.
All right, so you got on number 1 Super Mario Galaxy, on number 2 Chance of Sonar, on number 3 The Talos Principle, 4 is The Witness, and on 5 you got Journey.
I'd probably put Braid and The Witness next to each other.
Ah, right. Jonathan Blow all the way on number 4. Yeah, my list would be a lot different. I would go more for the PlayStation 1 era games.
Oh yeah.
Oh, end 2000s, beginning. No, not end 2000s. End of 90s, beginning 2000s.
Oh yeah.
Kind of with the same idea as how you approach it. So I like games that are very story driven and that don't just have action or something like that, right? But that actually provide something. In terms of meaning or in terms of message.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm really interested in a very specific type of gameplay. So games that I will put in no particular order, but I would go for me on number 1 is Silent Hill. Have you ever played the Silent Hill game?
I haven't, but I have friends that tell me all about it, pretty much all the time, and all about its psychological.
Yes.
That its approach to psychology and the unconscious, and I'm pretty sure that they take a lot of Carl Jung and implement his philosophies into the design of the game.
Yeah, they do. So the whole premise behind Silent Hill is that there's a town that when you enter it, your subconscious populates the environment.
Yeah.
So the more dark you are as a person, or the more trauma you have as a person, it manifests itself within that town. Which makes, for the first couple of Silent Hill games, they were made by a development team called Team Silent, which was in Japan, and it was a team that was part of Konami, the publisher of the game.
Yeah.
They created the first 4 Silent Hill games, which were also called 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the themes between these games was very different because that subconscious aspect. So the second one is the most famous one. Let me start with the first one. The first one was very. You have a moment in the game when there's like there's like the status quo, just the general city. It's the misty town where you can walk around and there are monsters, and those monsters, those are like the manifestations of your subconscious.
Yeah.
But every now and then it falls into chaos. and it goes to the extreme. It goes very bad. So the horror world degenerates pretty much into an extreme version of it. And in the first game, that manifested itself in a lot of metallic factory-like environments.
Yeah.
Where there were monsters that were literally going out to hurt someone. So it was a very physical, very, very direct physical danger. While in Silent Hill 2, it was more psychological. So there was trauma, there was regret.
Yeah.
That was playing a huge role, which made the whole environment and everything that you encountered there a lot different. Super interesting.
I love a game that uses environmental storytelling to its advantage. And I think it's very, very difficult to do because you've got to contemplate pretty much all aspects of the experience itself. So, like, it's different than, say, film, in which you've got a subject, which is, generally the center of the image, and the subject is playing out what is happening in the narrative. Piece by piece, and that there's you can kind of play around with that formula, but it's with a video game, so to speak. You're playing an avatar, you're playing a character, and you get to actually explore these diverse locations, and those locations are pretty much a microcosm for everything. Yeah.
That game has quite a cult following at the moment. So the fourth one came out, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in 2005, I think, or maybe 2004. And that's the moment that the original developer got disbanded, and then Konami decided to get a bunch of Western developers involved. Yeah, let's not speak about those games because they're not worth mentioning. But now is actually the moment that they are remaking the second one. And Konami has kind of a negative reputation at the moment, so I'm quite skeptical, but it does look okay, so fingers crossed it's going to be good.
Okay, well, if it's anything like PT, I'm sure we'll be fine.
Or that's the second one, PT, made by Hideo Kojima, the legend himself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually my second game, Metal Gear Solid by Hideo Kojima.
Yeah, I can totally understand why. I think if I were to put Metal Gear Solid on my list, I'd probably choose the sequel, Metal Gear Solid 2, for its
interesting.
Namely for its prediction of the filtering of too much information 20 years ahead of its time. It was a very prophetic game in that regard. I think on YouTube it's considered one of the most profound games ever made for that reason. Yeah. Just simply the fact that you've got this artificial intelligence that's essentially controlling everything, and they recognize that there's way too much information out there in the world, and because it is an artificial construct that sees everything, it deems itself the only thing that is capable of disseminating all that trash information and creating context, which is absolutely terrifying when you think about it. But I think that's very cool.
Did you actually know that, so speaking about the whole 20 years ahead of its time, did you actually know that a big part of Metal Gear Solid 2 was cut right after the game was actually done?
Would that have to do with 9/11, or am I wrong?
It did. No, it did.
Yeah.
I believe the game included a terrorist attack in New York, and I even believe it included, I'm not sure if it included planes, but it included a terrorist attack in New York.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, that terrorist attack in New York happened. So they had to cut that part completely out, but that was originally in the.
I did not know that. Well,
no, it's quite insane. There was a bit of a. I read an interview. It's quite a while ago, so I'm digging in my memory right now. But Hideo Kojima was kind of conflicted about the whole situation, and he was so conflicted he was actually thinking about just flat out canceling the whole game and not releasing it at all, because obviously it the timing couldn't be worse for it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
What would be the next one?
Yes, Silent Hill number 1, Metal Gear Solid on number 2. I will definitely go for The Witcher 3.
I can see why you picked it. I can see why you picked The Witcher 3.
It's just the branching, the branch, just the adventure that you can have in there, and the branching of the storyline that you can follow, and the choices that you have. So there's a lot of games that come at you and say like, hey, the game is being crafted by the choices that you make. But then in the end, you're playing it 3 times in a row and you're making different choices, and it doesn't change that much, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With The Witcher 3, it changes, which is really cool.
Yeah.
It's the kind of game that you can just open it and you can just walk around it and look around you. Go to a town and just look what's happening. Look at the geese that are running around, or look at the children playing, or whatever. It's an
Yeah,
amazing piece of.
I 100% agree. I've only ever played through it once, maybe about 10 years ago when it came out. I think it came out in 2016. I remember getting very much addicted to Gwent, the card game. I've never been addicted to card games. I absolutely detest card games, but it was one
Mhm.
of those games that actually helped me grow to appreciate card games in the video game medium. I can thank The Witcher 3 for that.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually not a fan of that at all. I was trying to skip through it as much as I can because at the beginning it is mandatory to do it, right? The moment you enter the bar, I believe.
Yeah,
Was that town called a White Orchard? I believe it's called.
I think that's it. I haven't played the game in a very long time.
Yeah, it's that bar where you first have to fight with the guys who are a bit skeptical about you because you are a Witcher. And that's where you play the card game. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's I got through that, and then after that I never touched it again. Yeah, not my cup of tea. But aside from that, amazing game. So my next would be actually Final Fantasy VII. Once again, a
Oh, yeah.
PlayStation 1 game. Yeah, it's currently being remade since the last couple of years. So that's
Yeah.
quite exciting.
Yeah. I think I know more about the cultural impact of Final Fantasy VII rather than the actual game. I've never actually played it. I've got it,
Mm,
but I've never actually played it. And yeah, I've heard more about the discourse and its effect on storytelling in gaming than than the actual content of the product itself. So I know that it's an absolutely gigantic beast of a game.
it
Yeah,
is.
it's massive.
Do you still remember the times where a big game needed multiple CDs?
Yes.
So Metal Gear Solid, for example, had that. At the end when you beat Sniper Wolf, then the moment you go down into the factory, the Iron Factory, you would have to switch your CDs. Final Fantasy VII had it twice. It had three CDs.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is insane.
At the time in 1997, it would have been a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
It,
That game was way too big for its.
but
Yeah,
good. If we didn't get it, we wouldn't have got other great masterpieces of the era. So it's a good little piece of history.
my last one to wrap it up is a little game called RimWorld. I'm not sure if you know it. No, it's relatively new. I believe it came out in 2017. So the developer would describe it as a story generator.
Yeah.
So pretty much in Dwarf Fortress, which is what RimWorld is based on, you have a couple of dwarves. They all have their skills. They all have their, motivations. They all have their relationships, that kind of stuff. And you drop them in a random environment, and then you just let them go. You manage them, you create their base, and you just let them live their lives pretty much. But what
Yeah.
makes that game so deep is that they all have, every specific part of their body is being simulated. So
Yeah.
even though they look like sprites on the screens, they have fingers, they have nails, they have arms, they have legs, they have brains, they have nostrils, they have
Yeah.
ears, they have everything, and everything can be simulated. But they can also get sick, they can also get into relationships, they can get drunk, they can overeat, they can start getting psychological breakdowns,
Yeah.
all that stuff. So it's a very deep simulation game that's, well, you can play it for 1,000 hours and never see the same thing twice, pretty much, which is quite insane. And RimWorld is that, but then not with dwarves, but with, well, it used to be humans, but now you also have different races in it, like alien kind of races in it, which makes it very interesting. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. Is there anything else from your side, Danny, that you would like to discuss?
I thought you might find this actually kind of interesting. I was a wedding videographer for 10 years. And over that 10-year period, I filmed, it was maybe between 400 and 500 weddings. So I got to watch the medium of wedding videography change over time, right? And not only did I get to see that, I got to see just what it takes, I guess, what it takes for a marriage to kind of survive, if you will. I also got to have a look at the different kind of groups of people that kind of got married and what they value. And I researched a little bit of this when I went back to university, the divorce rates, and I followed up on a lot of people, and it's all actually really quite interesting. So I thought you might be interested. It's a little bit different in Australia than the United States. When I began shooting wedding videography, right, it was maybe 2010, 2011, and back then most people were still shooting wedding videos, handheld with maybe a cassette tape, and
Yeah.
and it was all very like you'd be watching a wedding video and you feel like you'd be watching the Bourne Ultimatum or the Bourne Identity. The very gritty feel, and it would be like you'd feel sick. You'd feel sick watching it. You'd be like, I don't know why I'm gonna be watching 12 hours of this. Like, I don't want to watch this.
Right.
And so, like, straight out of university, doing my film degree, I thought, you know what, I need to get some real life experience, because I pretty much spent the last 20 years of my life in a classroom. I need to go out and experience the real world. So I came up with this idea, and I thought, okay, well, maybe we should begin like shooting these videos, like their movie trailers or like their music videos. Today in 2024, that idea has been like absolutely done to death. But at the time, it was still kind of a reasonably, revolutionary idea to have at the time. I wasn't the first person to come up with it. I'm sure that there were many other people around the world that had that idea.
Yeah,
And
but
this
it was taking shape in that time.
exactly. So this is like at the dawn of SLR cameras as well. So I said to my boss, look, why don't we shoot it like this? And he was very much against it. He just wanted the couple to the couples to get what they paid for, and I kind of went against his wishes, which was very stupid of 20-year-old me at the time, because I had a very romantic view on what cinema actually was, and I wanted to be the next George Lucas. I partly named my son after him because I'm such a big Star Wars fan, right?
Check.
So I thought, no, I want to make these as romantic as humanly possible. I want these to look like they're ripped straight out of a Disney film from like the 90s or 40s. And he was like, that sounds absolutely terrible, Danny. Just do what I pay you to do.
Right.
But I went behind his back and I did it anyway. I went out and I filmed a wedding in a very organized, structured manner, in little bits and pieces that, when edited together, would be kind of like a montage music video. And he thought, like, I thought he was going to fire me in that moment. And it's like, well, we're going to have to give the couple what you've edited, Danny. So, like, just go ahead and do it. We'll see what their reception is. It blew up. We went viral at the time. So for some reason, that video that we put up went viral in Asia, in India. I don't know why, but and suddenly my boss at the time, it suddenly became his idea, and he was the guy that wanted to reap all the rewards, and he was the genius that came up with the idea. I thought, okay, I don't care. So we began shooting weddings like that, and I got sent to more and more and more weddings. After a while, I decided to steer away from people that I could not have a good relationship with. We needed to be on the same page in terms of values in order to get this thing working. Because when you're shooting a wedding, because there are so many people, and people just want to have a good time at a wedding, they don't want a camera being stuck in their faces. You've only got one chance to do it right. You can't make mistakes. You need to make sure that the batteries are charged for all the cameras at the beginning of the day. You need to make sure that you've got the correct lenses on the correct cameras at the correct times, and that the cameras are in the correct locations on the correct tripods, and that mum is in the correct place and dad is in the correct place. Unlike photography, in which you're only getting snapshots, as a videographer, you're getting constant moving snapshots. So it generally people generally end up relying on the videographer to kind of emotionally manage everyone's expectations throughout the day and say, okay, at 2 o'clock we need to get this shot, and then from 2 o'clock we need to move to this location where we can get this panning shot, or this wide shot for the next 15 seconds to 30 seconds. Like this, you really need to chalk everything down to the minute and the second. And it's very exhausting. So you really need to build that strong level of communication in order to get it right.
How much of it was improvised versus a formula that you apply to most weddings?
I would say roughly 50% of the time it's actually improvised.
Okay. That's quite a bit.
I know on days like weddings, anything and everything can go wrong. So you need to plan for pretty much every single eventuality. I've been on a few wedding shoots where they've requested like drone footage, where I've had to fly, a drone around a church, or over a wide open space in order to get, that kind of establishing shot that they want. And the drone has been attacked by a bird or flown it into a tree. Or one time I was filming a couple on the steps of the church with a drone, and it just so happens that the church happened to be right next to an all-girls school, and they thought I was perving on all the girls, which I wasn't. But they saw fit to confiscate my drone, and I had to explain to them that I had permission from the proper authorities to be there, because in order to fly a drone, there's actually a process that you need to go through. Right. Exactly. You need to actually have a drone license. So if in Australia, if the drone is under 2 kilos, you really don't need one. But anything over 2 kilos, you need what's called a REPL license. That's REPL, all capitals. You need a REPL license. I've flown drones that are about 25 kilos, and they can only fly in the air for maybe about 20 minutes before they run out of battery power. They're really, really good in strong wind conditions. So yeah. Anyway, you need to kind of plan for all of those little eventualities and make sure maybe you've got a spare drone on hand so that it doesn't get confiscated by with the rosary beads that are coming at you with a stick. Like you need to plan for literally every eventuality.
I see that bunch of girls panicking in front of me right now with a 25-kilo drone above them.
Yeah. I once shot a wedding where it was on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, and it took me like 5 hours to get to by driving, right? And Australia is really, really unique in just how big it is, right? In Europe, if you drive 5 hours in any direction, you'll end up in a different country. But if you drive in 5 hours in Australia, you'll still be pretty much in the same area. So I drove out to this farmland, and I was really tired, and I set up all the cameras, and they wanted the ring bearer to be a donkey on the farm, right? So the donkey would come down the aisle before everyone, and it would have the rings on its head, and it was all tied down, and it was all very, I don't know, all very Australian, and everyone thought it was quite cute. And we've got a donkey that's pretty much walking down the aisle. Okay. The problem was that the donkey had really terrible dysentery. So as he was walking down the aisle, a steady layer of poo was following right behind him. And then we had to delay the wedding by about 30 minutes while everyone had to clean it up. And so naturally, we had to plan for that and set up cameras elsewhere. And we had to recharge the batteries, because that's 30 minutes worth of camera battery wasted on filming nothing but a donkey pooing. So
how long does it take to charge?
It depends on the batteries that you have and what camera you're using. It could be anywhere from, 30 minutes to 5 hours. And
right, okay.
The cameras that you use, they're obviously changing over time as technology gets better and better and better and better and better.
Yeah.
So it's a process.
All right, Danny. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Is there anything else that you would like to comment on?
Not that I think of. No, all good. It was great coming on, and I'm glad that we managed to actually get it working despite the internet dramas that we had before we could begin talking.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on.
Cool. No problem. I'll catch you later.
And with that, Danny Taylor-Smith has left the conversation. If you'd like to hear more about Danny's story, you can find his TED Talk in the description below. I want to thank you for joining me in this conversation, and I hope you found it useful. If so, liking, following, or subscribing, depending on the platform that you're listening on, will be greatly appreciated. And with that said, take care.